My name is Linda Rising, and I'm an it. As soon as I saw that quadrant go up with the scientific method and the discipline and measurements, I said, yeah, that's me. Sorry. I'm also on the board for IEEE software. I support our professional organizations. And as a result, they send me lots of extra copies of all the magazines. They know I go to lots of places where people might not know about IEEE software or ACM publications. So I'm going to put these on the stage right here. And before the end of the day, I would like them all to disappear. I do not want to take them back to Nashville in my suitcase. So this latest issue of IEEE software is on architectural sustainability. Could be good. Yeah. So how many of you are doing Agile something? So most of you are doing Agile something, and one of the issues I get asked all the time is about incentives. And probably that's something you think about as well. That's why you're here and not in one of those other interesting and French presentations. So the research on incentives is pretty clear. And I will just give you a brief summary up front, and then if you want to go hear one of those other talks, you can do it. Incentives don't work. You want a little more information than that? I'll be here for the rest of the day. Obviously, I have to give the closing keynote. So if you don't get a chance to ask questions, I would like to leave a little bit of space at the end, but that doesn't always happen. If you don't get a chance to talk about what's on your mind, you've got my email address and my website. So I've written about this topic and other Agile-flavored topics. So please feel free to send me some email saying, Linda, you talked about incentives, and here's what I'm wondering, and I'd love to talk about Agile or patterns or how your brain works. It's my primary interest. So this all started a long time ago. It was a Russian scientist. Might have heard of him, Pavlov. We talk about the Pavlovian response. He noticed that he had dogs in his laboratory and that when he brought food in at a certain time every day, the dogs seemed to know. They knew ahead of time that the food was coming in. They'd start getting anxious, they'd start salivating, they'd start doing all those dog things, obviously excited, even before the food arrived. And of course we know that the dogs picked up other cues. There are a lot of animals that are sensitive. How many of you have dogs? And the dog waits at the door. The dog knows when you're coming home. Noticed a lot of things about dogs that are very intuitive. In fact, after looking at a lot of this research, I think we should have dogs on our teams. I think they could probably help us with some estimation problems. They might be able to do a better job of predicting than we do. You could think about that. I'm actually semi-serious. I give a talk about improving your workplace environment, and one of the suggestions I make is having pets in the workplace. How many of you have the chance to bring a dog or a cat or a bird into your workplace? One? Very good. Very good. So you might think about that. Plenty of research that shows, you thought I was joking about estimation, but plenty of research shows that having animals in the workplace helps you be better. So in order to explain this behavior, Pavlov said, well, you know, it's interesting that I can sort of train these animals. I give them little cues in the environment. I can train them to do whatever I want. I give them positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and I can pretty much determine what their behavior will be. That's called behaviorism, and it has been with us ever since. So what Pavlov started with his dogs is still in your workplace today. Your manager somehow believes that with the right cues, that somehow he or she can manipulate your behavior. That's the whole basis for incentives, is that we respond in the appropriate way to those cues in the environment, and therefore our behavior is determined. Hence the name behaviorism. We still run organizations this way. Even though the research that we'll go through now shows clearly that we're not that simple, and that those carrots and sticks often have the opposite effect. So we need to pay attention. The research is out there. It's not a matter of individual versus team rewards. It's about the whole notion of the power of incentives. We've got it wrong. There's the dog. I love animals. Yeah, there he is. Anybody know who this is? Nobody. There's not a dog. No, sorry. His name is Taylor. Taylor also had a profound impact. He was definitely an it guy. And at the time, that was called for. He was looking at assembly line processes. He was looking at the kind of work that people do when they perform the same act over and over and over again. And he was concerned with efficiency. So he did a lot of measurement. And he showed clearly that you could improve performance by enhancing the work environment. He was the first to take a scientific approach to the workplace. Let's measure. Actually, I think that's kind of agile. Not dictating, but, well, let's do a little experiment and let's learn from that. And that's exactly what he did. This was his famous book, The Principles of Scientific Management. And in it he says, work consists of mainly simple, not particularly interesting tasks. The only way to get people to do them is to incentivize them properly and monitor them carefully. That was true for the assembly line. He was absolutely spot on. His work showed clear improvements in productivity and efficiency. But now think about what you do every day. Does this describe your workplace? It's mainly simple, not particularly interesting. Oh, maybe it does. Simple-minded, repetitive tasks. Because if it does, then Taylor is right and Pavlov is right. You can incentivize. But if you want people to be creative, if you want people to be innovative, if you want them to solve complicated problems, then getting out the carrot or stick that might be appropriate will get you the wrong result. It's unfortunate that not only managers, but the rest of us have bought into that as well. So managers believe that somehow the best way to get people to do something is to provide a proper reward or a proper punishment, and that will get the behavior they desire. But we also do it to ourselves. Anybody who's felt guilty about taking a little bit of time off when they should be working. Anybody who's spent a little slice of time during the course of the day daydreaming, which I also recommend, by the way. Lots of benefits to daydreaming, to doing nothing. But when we do it, we feel guilty. We have bought into the Taylor myth, and we think that that's not real work. I worked for a company that was part of Bell Labs for a little while, and I can remember hearing a story about one of the inventors of C and Unix who was caught by his boss taking a nap in his cubicle, and the boss said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm thinking." And of course, his boss said exactly what I heard another manager say just recently when they asked, "Hey, Linda, what's pair programming all about?" I know you've got two people sitting in front of a computer and one of them is typing, but what's the other one doing? And my answer was, well, the other person is thinking. Now, this was in the US, so this manager pounded on the table and he said, "Thinking? We don't have time for that. We have to get this product out the door by June. No thinking." Takes time away from real work. I think most of the time that's really our job, isn't it? Thinking. So in 1949, still long before most of you were born, I suspect, there was an interesting experiment done by a guy named Harlow, and he was working with some little monkeys, rhesus monkeys, and he was going to give them a puzzle, and he was going to do some experiments with incentives. And he put the puzzle in the cage with the monkeys, and he noticed something really strange. The monkeys immediately began to work on the puzzle and try to solve it before he had given them any incentives. And he wondered, why are they doing that? I haven't given them any treats yet. Why would they just immediately start to work on the puzzle? And as he thought about it, he realized that the monkeys, in their own way, seemed to be enjoying it. They were working on the puzzle for the joy of solving the puzzle. Now, at that time, there were only a few reasons why people thought animals, and that includes us, did anything. On the one hand, you had all those biological forces. We were hungry or thirsty, or we wanted to have sex, or we were concerned about our survival, the biological forces. And on the other hand, the carrots and the sticks, those are called extrinsic, things outside us. And that was it. And all of a sudden, he began to see what we might call an internal motivation, an intrinsic motivation. To do it for the joy, because it's fun to work on the little puzzle. In fact, as he went ahead with his experiments, he saw that when he rewarded the monkeys for solving the puzzle, they lost interest. Began a long series of results of experiments that showed exactly that when you incentivize some activity that could be done for the love of it or the joy of it, you remove the joy. And you make it less likely that the animal, whether it's a monkey or it's a person, a software developer or a child, you make it less likely that they're going to continue not only to do it, but to love to do it. You'll destroy the joy with incentives. It was a disturbing time, disturbing results that were ignored, as I say here, for over 2 decades. No one wanted to have a lot of upheaval in the structure of incentives, and they certainly didn't like this result, that when the element of joy was involved, that now incentives seem to be counterproductive. By rewarding, you actually destroyed productivity and efficiency. It's counterintuitive. Now look at the date, 1949. This is not news. And we're still not paying attention. We're still back with Taylor and Pavlov. We still believe somehow that you can manipulate people with simple incentives, that that's how you control, even in enormously complex environments where we require productivity and creativity. We believe we can control that with the proper incentive. Let's give a big bonus. That'll get people to work hard. It's like saying, come on, you people, you've got 2 weeks, be creative. How's that working for you? We should pay attention to what we see in front of us all the time. And then some interesting work by two men, one of whom unfortunately is no longer with us, Daniel Kahneman and his friend Amos Tversky. And they came up with some interesting ideas about economics. They call it prospect theory. And it began a brand new field of economics called behavioral economics. Up till that point, what we had was something called classical economics that sits firmly on the belief that man, in the sense of generic man, men and women, are rational decision makers. Let's take a little poll now. How many smart people in the room? Yes, oh, lots, indeed. So therefore, because you are smart, you are rational. It goes hand in hand, doesn't it? Being smart with being logical and rational. Yes, how many rational decision makers in the room? One. Thank you. Thank you. Are you married? Was that a rational? Not sure about. So there might be some decisions where even you are, well, you know, did you make a little decision tree where you had the positives on one side, the negatives, and then you prioritized? I have known people who have done that, by the way, prioritized and then decided, yes, I will marry this person. Did you do that? No. So maybe that wasn't rational. So there might be a few areas where we're not rational. Well, we might concede that. Well, here's the bad news. Here's the really bad news. That none, that's as in zero, since I'm an it person, that's zero of your decisions are rational. You agree? It's logical, isn't it? It's logical that we're not rational. So here's a game. Kahneman decided that he was going to provide a little test. And so he put people in pairs, so this is like pair testing. And to one of those subjects in the pair, he gave a certain amount of money. So this experiment has been performed around the world with different amounts of money, especially different amounts relative to the annual salary of the country where the experiment is performed. And the results are always the same. First subject gets a certain amount of money, let's say $10, and can make then an offer of a certain amount of that money to the second subject, a certain percentage of the $10. Now it's up to the second subject to accept it, and if he or she does, then they both get to keep, and it's real money. They both get to keep that money. So if subject one offers, say, $5, I'll split it with you. I'll give you $5. If the second subject says, fine, I'll take it, then they both get to keep $5. That's how the game works. Okay? Now here's the interesting result. If subject one doesn't make a fair offer to subject two, around the world, subject twos will say, no way. So, for instance, subject one makes an offer to subject two of $1. I'll give you $1 and I'll keep 9. How about that? Subjects two say, no way. Now think about that. Is that rational? you're going to get $1 that you didn't have. You come out ahead. No, we say, I'm not taking that $1 because, and what we do is we give what we think is a reason. And here's what we're really good at. We're very good at explaining why we did something afterwards, and that's called rationalization. So what's the rationalization for that? I'm not taking that $1, and if you don't take the $1, then that means nobody gets anything. Nobody gets anything. So you've just lost $1. And the reason you give is, what's the word that comes to mind? It's not fair. It's not fair. You get to keep $9, I only get to keep $1. Fairness. And it started an enormous amount of research on our very deep connection with that notion of fairness, which is not logical, it's emotional. All right, for all of you who are religious, let's say a little prayer now to the computer gods. And we will hope that this little video I'm about to show you will work. It shows monkeys, I love monkeys, in an experiment that demonstrates our deep connection to fairness. Now, in the experiment, the monkeys are being taught how to buy and sell. So they're given a little token, which looks kind of like a rock, and then they can turn around and buy something with it. So you'll see the experimenter give each monkey a little rock, and then the monkey has to examine it and give it back to buy something. And when the monkey gives it back, then the experimenter will give a little snack, a token, a treat, or something. Please make this video work. Yes. Okay, here's the rock. Fine, I'm going to give you a cucumber. Oh, monkeys love cucumbers. Here's your rock. Oh, give it back to me now. And so you can buy a treat. There it is. Okay, fine. I'm going to give you a grape. Wait a minute. He got a grape? Hold it. I want a grape. I want a grape. I don't want that cucumber. What are you giving me? What is this? I want a grape. Come on. Give me a grape. He got a grape. It's not fair. It's not fair. What do you mean he's getting another grape? I want a grape. Don't give me that cucumber. Don't give me that cucumber. Come on, come on. Oh, no, no way. No way. Take that cucumber. No. I think the notion of fairness is pretty deep. You even see it in animals. So the fairness issue gets in the way. And then the other problem is we become focused on the reward. So in this little experiment, they examined what happened Pizza Hut. Now, I'm sorry to say the United States is no longer the fattest nation on the face of the earth. We're number 2 now. Mexico has taken over, but we're still running a close second. So we're hoping to catch up. Our children have high incidences of obesity, which leads to early onset of type 2 diabetes. They're even showing that little children have heart disease. Hence, the worry about any kind of incentive to eat. So Pizza Hut said, here's what we're going to do. We want children to read. So if they read a certain number of books, we'll give them coupons for free pizzas. Sound like a good idea? It's an incentive. You want somebody to do something, you provide a proper incentive. Children love pizza, so we'll give them coupons for free pizzas, and they'll read more books. That would be a wonderful thing, wouldn't it? And what they saw was children did read more books. But they tended toward those books that were small, easy to read, so they could crank up the numbers and get more pizza. The focus became the pizza, not the reading. And what you always get in a study like this around incentives are things that are called unintended consequences. You started out with a good heart. You were concerned about children and reading, and the unintended consequence was fat kids who don't like to read. When they're incented, it's exactly like Harlow's experiments in 1949. When they're rewarded for something, there's something in our brains that says, you know, if I have to have pizza in order to read, then probably I don't like to do it. And the research shows that when you take away the reward, then whatever it was that they loved or liked about reading disappears completely, and their reading goes way down. So as long as you keep incenting, you can observe the behavior, but what you're going to get is a big set of unintended consequences, like more fat kids who don't like to read. So this is a nice summary I found in New Scientist just recently that kind of pulls it all together. So since 1949, there's a huge amount of research that all shows the same thing. Economists and workplace consultants regard it as almost unquestioned dogma that people are motivated by rewards. So they don't feel the need to test this. It has the status more of religious truth than scientific hypothesis. The facts are absolutely clear. Look at the research. There is no question that in virtually all circumstances in which people are doing things in order to get rewards, extrinsic, tangible rewards undermine intrinsic motivation. When you give monkeys raisins or children pizza, you take away any of the joy they might have had in solving that puzzle or reading that book. So please re-examine all of those incentives programs. It's not about the difference between individuals and teams. It's about the whole notion of incentives. I don't know, you listen to podcasts up here in Montreal? Freakonomics is one of my favorites. I recommend it. Steve Levitt is an economist at the University of Chicago, and he said, no individual, no government is ever going to be as smart as the people who are scheming against you, those people you're trying to incent. When you introduce an incentive scheme, no matter how clever you think you are, there's a pretty good chance that someone far more clever than you will figure out a way to beat that incentive scheme. In other words, whatever it is that you're trying to do with that incentive scheme will almost always backfire. How many of you know the name Dan Ariely? Yes, any book he's written, I recommend. He is one of the leading behavioral economists, and he does an excellent job of translating the results from all the research into books that we can all understand. I recommend his TED Talks as well as all of his books, or just Google on Dan Ariely. He has a wonderful website. So he went to India, and he did some really interesting experiments with software teams. And he provided incentives at various levels. So we won't go into the details of how much, but we'll just say small. Some teams got a small incentive, some got a medium-sized incentive, and some teams got a very, very, very large incentive. Now, when people examine that experimental design, everyone always comes to the same conclusion. They think, well, the team that gets the huge, huge bonuses, the huge, huge incentives, they're going to do better. They're kind of got what? More solutions, better solutions. They're just going to be better because their incentives are so far ahead of the small and medium incentives. In fact, after the experiment was run and they had the results, he presented it to MBA students at Stanford, pretty smart guys, executives of large corporations. And they all fell into the same trap of believing that, yes, that team that got the large incentives, well, of course, they would be the high performers. And of course, the results show that no, They were the worst. Small and medium were about the same. Now, what's really disturbing is that in showing high-level executives all the results about incentives, especially big bonuses, most of those executives tend to say, well, I could understand how that might be the case for teams. But for executives, of course, we know that those large incentives make sure that you have the high-power talent you need at the high levels of decision-making within an organization. Of course, those bonuses are different. And what we see now is a greater and greater disparity between the amount of money that those high-level, any executives in the room? Between those high-level executives and the bonuses, regardless of performance, in many cases. The greater disparity between those high-level executive performance bonuses and what the rest of us are taking home. And this in the face of all the research that clearly shows higher level bonuses are even more of a disincentive. We just don't want to pay attention. So it turns out that yes, there are the same benefits I mentioned earlier if you're doing a simple, repetitive, the kinds of things that Taylor showed in his work. You can provide incentives for people on an assembly line. You can get them to work a little faster, especially if you improve their environment, the lighting, the work situation. Absolutely. You do get incentive bonuses there. And there are cases where the incentive is tied to the result you want to see. So the two examples I hear, Google will pay you if you find a problem in its browser. That's an incentive that works. I don't know if you're familiar with a Zappos company. Yeah, it's an online retailer. They do a lot of training for people that come to work for them, and after the end of 2 weeks of training, they say to everybody in the room, we are going to pay you $3,000 to quit now. And the idea behind that incentive is they think that working for Zappos is a privilege. You should want to work there. You should want to work there so bad that you're willing to pass up a $3,000 bonus to stay. And what they find is a certain small percentage, about 2 to 3% of those trainees will take the bonus. And Zappos feels that they're ahead of the game, because these are people that might not have stayed anyway. So that kind of incentive, very effective. Pay people to leave, and if they say yes, then you think, all right, they didn't really want to be here at all. This was an interesting experiment by John List and a friend of his. John List does an enormous amount of work on incentives and motivation. So just Google on John List and you'll pull up all kinds of interesting information. This was an experiment done in China. And they took two groups of people and they gave one a bonus and they said, look, if you get this bonus, you must perform, otherwise you're going to lose it. And the other group was told, well, if you perform, then you'll get the bonus. So it's a little bit kind of a backward incentive, but once we're given something, we really want to hang on to it. That's called loss aversion. It's a pretty strong, hardwired cognitive problem we have. We hate losing. So once somebody on a team is told you've already got the bonus, now you've got to really work hard or we'll take it away. That kind of incentive is very effective. So you might think about that if you're thinking about incentives. And those of you who do training or teaching, this is also effective. In the beginning, you say to the class, and I taught for a while in university, I wish I could go back and try this experiment. Everybody has an A. You start out on the first day, everybody has an A. Now, it's your job to hang on to that. And here are the rules. You've got to make a certain score on a test, or you've got to write a paper, or a certain number of programs, or a certain number of projects, or whatever it is. It's the same work you'd have to do for an ordinary class, but we're going to start out by assuming that you are going to get an A at the end. And that assumption turns education on its head. People are much more successful in an environment like that. And I think it's because all of a sudden a student feels, you know, this teacher thinks I could make an A here. And that belief turns out to be very, very powerful. Here's what we know about your brain. There are two centers that are important in this debate about incentives. One of them is the part that reacts to the incentive itself, the reward center. That's involved with addiction and anything that we really, really enjoy. And the other part of our brain that's of concern to us in Agile development is the part that is involved in working with others, in collaborating, in cooperating. And the interesting thing about these two areas is that they can never fire at the same time. So if somebody's focused on reward, especially reward for me, their collaboration and their interest in cooperation goes down. So by incenting individuals over the team, if that's what you're considering, what you're doing is turning off the part of the brain that's so important in getting along with everyone else on the team. You can have one or the other. Take your choice. So we talked about giving an A. How many managers in the room? A lot. Okay. I'm hoping you've read this paper, 1988. Have you read it? Of course, you'll say you have. Even one, I forgot to make an offer at the beginning. If there's any paper you see referenced, you say, Linda, can you send me a paper about Airley's experiments in India? Or can you send me that Harvard Business Review about the Pygmalion effect? And I'll be happy to send it to you. Okay. Or I can give you a pointer to it. So this paper was written in 1988, and it was about a series of observations, semi-experiments that showed, well, wait a minute, let's talk about managers. So I read some research that said managers make up their mind pretty quickly when someone is hired in an organization, long before they have a chance to really observe performance. Managers have already decided whether or not this is going to be an okay person or not okay. It was very disturbing to me to read that, and I've never been a manager, so I asked a friend of mine, I said, hey, David, is that true? Would you say that managers make up their mind before they have a chance to observe performance? What do you think? So he said, well, Linda, yeah, maybe, I guess. We do perhaps do that, but we're always right. Well, of course they are. Of course they are. Because if I've already made up my mind as a manager, whether you're okay or you're not okay, then that's the message I keep sending about you, that you keep picking up from me, that you're okay or you're not okay. That's what I see. It's almost like I set a little filter on my brain, so that's all I see. If I think you're okay, then that's what I see, and if I think you're not okay, that's what I see. And my expectation drives your response to that expectation, and I create somebody who's okay or somebody who's not okay. Self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's what that paper points out. The enormous power not only a manager, but a teacher has over the team or the students. If I believe that you are an A student, I treat you a little differently from someone who is not. And that expectation can create what I want to see, an A student or not. And what I'll talk about in the keynote is how we do that to each other. So now the research is trending away from incentives to say, well, what do people want? So I have a good friend who trains search and rescue dogs, and she explained that there are really two kinds of dogs that go into disastrous happenings and they try to find people who have been buried. There are the dogs who've been trained to find people who are alive. And then there are the dogs who've been trained to find people who are not. And if it's a giant, huge disaster, this is a picture from the Oklahoma City bombing, or 9/11, then usually they just bring in all the dogs because the disaster is so overwhelming. And what they notice is that the dogs who've been trained to find a living human being, after a while become discouraged, disheartened, sad, depressed, because they're not finding any living people anymore. After a while, all they find are people who have been buried alive and who are dead. So what the rescue workers have learned is that they take turns, and at the end of the day, they'll hide in the rubble and let the dogs find them. And then the dogs are so happy because they found somebody who's alive, and they feel better. It's almost like they need a reason, a sense of purpose. They want to find somebody who's still alive. That's why they go to work every day. They want to find somebody who's still alive. So this is another experiment by Dan Ariely, and it fits right in with the dogs. Dan's graduate students brought people in to build little robots out of Legos. And he said, we're going to pay you a certain amount of money to build a little robot out of Lego. We're going to start with a certain amount of money, and for every one you build, we'll reduce the amount that you get paid, but we'll still keep paying you. And you can build as many of the Lego robots as you want. And when we get to the end, we'll add up the number and we'll multiply by the amount, and we'll pay you a certain amount of money. Okay. They signed up people and they started building robots in two different groups. So in one group, they lined up all the robots that each subject built. And when they got to the end, the subject could say, wow, I've built all these robots, but I think I'll stop now and you can pay me for building those robots. So they added it up and they gave them a certain amount of money. And in the other group, they had the subject build a robot, and then if they said they wanted to build another one, well, while they were building the next one, they took the first one apart. Now, we know that at the end of the other group, even if all the robots are lined up, that, yeah, they're probably going to take all those robots apart so that the next subject can come in and build robots. We know that's going to happen, but would it make a difference for the people in the second group? While they're building the next robot, they see that the experimenter is tearing apart the one they just built. Would that make a difference in how many times they'd want to go through that exercise? Would that make a difference in how many robots they would decide to build? Turns out it makes a big difference. Those who have to watch their creation being torn apart right in front of them only build about a half to 2/3 as many robots as those who can see what it looks like, all lined up, all those robots. So even in an experiment, even when they know it's all just a joke in a way, that I'm just here for a short time to build these robots and then I'm going to walk out the door, it's not a great creation. But even in that experimental situation, watching somebody tear what we've built and just throw it all back in the box. It's like the dogs who can't find anybody who's alive anymore. It's the sense of purpose, the reason why we do it. Dan said after this experiment, if you take people who love something, they had people in the second group who said they love to build Legos. If you take people who love something and place them in meaningful working conditions, the joy they derive from the activity is going to be a major driver in dictating how many robots or whatever their level of effort is going to be. But if you take the same people who loved robots and Legos equally well as the first group, and you put them in different situations, meaningless working conditions, you can kill any joy they might derive from the activity. So we saw it with the rhesus monkeys, we saw it with the children reading, and now Airly has done it with robots. The incentives work against you. This is a brand new book. I recommend it highly. I have almost finished it. I was going to bring it here and give it away because we need to have more people reading it. This was about a giant study that was done by Teresa Amabile and her husband at Harvard Business School. They looked at teams of software developers. How often does that happen? They really collected data from the kinds of things that we see every day. And they made a list of things that they said were important to those people and what measurably helped their work and what measurably slowed them down. And at the top of the list is something called progress in meaningful work. Of all the events that can deeply engage people in their jobs, this is the single most important. It has nothing to do with bonuses. It has nothing to do with raisins or treats or incentives or free pizza. It has to do with something they care about, something that brings them joy, and seeing that they're getting somewhere, like the robot experiment. I don't want somebody tearing it apart after I just built it. I want to feel like what I did today moved me forward a little bit over where I was yesterday. And I want it to be in something that I care about. It's got to mean something. So the summary of the book is pretty short. Work is important to most people. There are some people, of course, who don't care or are not happy, but most people do. They care about what they do. And inner work life, the feeling that they're doing something worthwhile, tends to more creativity, productivity, commitment, and collegial coworkers. And then finally, I thought it was interesting, it's much more important what your own local environment, your local team, your local manager, your local team lead are than whether or not the corporate level is purely dysfunctional. So I recommend the book highly. So if you're a manager, then instead, if somebody starts bringing up incentives, talk about what are we all about? Instill a sense of purpose. You want to be helpful. I like the term servant leader. That comes up a lot in Agile development. You're there to support the team and celebrate successes. So much more important than a bonus or free pizza. So the short answer, it's not about carrots and sticks. Lots of research since 1949 shows we and other animals don't react in predictable ways. It's about purpose. It's about making progress in meaningful work. It's about joy. Little things are so much more important than big, giant things. Listen to your team. Stay open. Keep learning. Have a grateful heart. Thank you.